And Neil, you're taking me way back, man. That internship that you mentioned, it was at a company called Edcast. Honestly, that was way back in high school. That was
Mm.
when I did my first internship. I've been coding for nearly 14, 15 years at this point. Self-learned how to do it when I was in high school. And that's very normal if you grow up in the Silicon Valley. For those of you that don't know,
Mm.
you're bound to learn coding at some point. Usually, eighth grade, ninth grade is when it kind of starts. But during that process, I just wanted to get some real world experience. I took some time to get this internship at the startup. They were also like a Series A startup at the time, so
Mm.
very early stage. And so I got to see kind of the beginnings of what it's like to work in a tight environment like that. But to be honest, at that time, I still didn't really know if I was going to go into entrepreneurship. It was still
Mm.
very early in my career. And it was only after I went to college that I really started to internalize, the possibility of wanting to become an entrepreneur.
Mm.
But little did I know that, I was going to do it so quickly because I graduated from college in 2022.
Mm.
And I worked for a year at another startup as a founding engineer and took them from 0 to 1 while I was there. And I think the first thing that I thought about was if I could do this as an engineer and take the startup to 0 to 1, why not just do this myself with my own startup?
I like that. I
And
like that.
next thing you know, I go apply to Y Combinator, and I reached out to one of my closest friends from high school, who I met through choir, by the way, interestingly
Mm.
enough. So we met through music, and he was down to do the startup with me, and the rest has been history. Y Combinator, we got in, and we've just been growing since.
I love that. And there are so many things I'd love to like pick up on within that size. So as you said, like you were a kid growing up in Silicon Valley, coding is kind of like going to happen, right? And you do it from quite a young age. So I think the things that kind of sprung to my mind was there. So with me, obviously I'm not a coder by any stretch, but the things that I fell in love with when I was younger, and I've said it on a previous episode, was we didn't have enough cash growing up in my family, but my father had a IBM 486 computer that one day he brought
Yeah.
home back from the office, and he said, well, that's yours. And I was like, well, this doesn't look like a Super Nintendo, man. Like this isn't that. But it literally had like this thick page document of MS-DOS codes and prompts and etc. And it was a Windows, I think it was in a Windows NT, way before 95. And I used to sit for hours on a Saturday morning playing in MS-DOS and just trying to hack the computer or figure out the languaging stuff. But years later, it wasn't until I got into college that when I like kind of got into IT that I started learning things such as Visual Basic. And we were then taught to code and build programs, and it was Flash games and that sort of stuff, right? But as you mentioned, perhaps quite a few of my audience may not be familiar with Silicon Valley.